1885. Ash Mesa, Wyoming Territory. The desert wind had a way of scraping the skin off sound itself, leaving only breath and heat. June Hale walked through that silence, each step sinking into sand that burned even through her worn boots. The sun had no mercy left. It poured straight down, white and endless, bleaching color out of everything, including her hope. A single buzzard circled high, slow, and sure, tracing her in wide, patient loops. She carried a small pack and a knife with a broken spine. The steel dulled, but the edge still honest. The handle bore 2 letters, carved deep and worn soft by time. M.B. She didn't know whose hands had carved them. Her father never said. He never said much of anything, not even the day he told her to go. She could still see him at the fence line, coat half-buttoned, jaw working like he was chewing his own shame. "If you want to live," he'd said, "don't come back." The words had been clean, almost gentle, as if kindness could dull their cut. Behind him, the house sagged under the weight of debt and silence. June had stood there a heartbeat too long, waiting for something more, a reason, a touch, maybe, a lie that sounded like love. Nothing came, only wind. Now, days later, her throat was cracked and raw, the canteen at her belt nearly empty. Her horse had gone lame 2 nights before, left tied beneath a dying cottonwood. She kept walking. Pride would not let her crawl. By late afternoon, the horizon trembled. Heat shimmered like thin glass. She thought she saw water pooling near a rise of stone. Mirage or not. She moved toward it. Her hands trembled as she dropped to her knees, scraping through dust until her fingers found a trace of damp, just enough to darken the earth. She pressed her lips to it, tasted grit and life all at once. The taste pulled something loose inside her, a memory of her mother humming while washing clothes by the creek, sunlight caught in her hair, the rhythm of small peace before everything fell apart. It was gone in an instant, swallowed by thirst and the sound of the wind. June sat back, breath shallow. The desert had a voice of its own, soft but cruel. It whispered of bones lost beneath its skin, of travelers who thought they were stronger than sun and sand. She wasn't sure which one she was yet. Night came sudden, as it did in the high plains. One blink, and the heat was gone, replaced by a cold that crawled under her skin. She found a hollow between rocks, built a small fire from dry brush. The flame flickered weakly, painting her face in copper light. She turned the knife in her hand, studying the letters again. M.B. Maybe it had once meant something. Someone's initials, a mark of belonging. Maybe it meant nothing at all, just an old scar left by someone else's story. Still, she couldn't shake the pull of it. The metal felt too familiar, as if her fingers had known it long before she did. Far off, a coyote cried. The sound carried across the flats, thin and lonely. June hugged her knees close, eyes on the horizon, where the stars began to bloom. She told herself she would move at dawn, keep west until she found the railroad or a settlement. But deep down, she knew she was running from more than hunger. When the fire sank to embers, the wind changed. It carried a sound that didn't belong to the desert. A faint, rhythmic pounding, growing clearer with each breath. Hooves, steady, heavy, unhurried. June's pulse climbed. She pressed the knife flat against her thigh, listening. The hoofbeats came closer, echoing against the stone, and then stopped. For a moment, nothing, not even the wind. Then a low voice, rough but calm, broke the dark. "You shouldn't be out here alone." June's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the knife. The fire flickered once, lighting the dust in the air between them. And in that thin gold glow, she saw a shadow on horseback, tall, still, haloed by the dying light of her fire. The rider moved closer, slow, as if not to startle the dark. His horse, a tall black gelding, breathed steam into the cold air. The man swung down in one smooth motion, boots crunching against the grit. Even in the weak firelight, June could see he was built for work. Broad shoulders, hands rough as the land itself. His coat was dust gray, his hat pulled low, hiding his eyes. "I'm not looking for company," June said. Her voice cracked from thirst, the knife still tight in her hand. "Didn't figure you were," he answered. "But this country eats people who think they can walk it alone." The firelight caught his face for an instant. Dark skin, a beard flecked with trail dust, eyes steady and watchful. He looked like a man who'd seen enough of both mercy and violence to know the measure of each. "I can take care of myself." He looked at her the way one might look at a young horse, too wild to trust its own footing. "Maybe so," he said. "But I'd wager you're 3 days without water, 1 without sleep. That's not self-care. That's suicide." He dropped a small bundle near the fire, jerky, a flask, and a square of cloth damp with water. "Eat, then talk if you've got words left." June hesitated. Pride was the only thing she had left that hadn't blistered or bled. But the smell of salt and meat broke through her resolve. She took the jerky, tore a strip with her teeth, and swallowed against the ache in her throat. He didn't watch her. Instead, he knelt by the fire, coaxing the flame higher with a handful of dried sagebrush. The sparks leapt between them, tiny worlds that burned and died in a heartbeat. When she finished, he handed her the flask. Water. Not much, but clean. She drank in small sips, eyes never leaving his hands. "You always ride around feeding strangers." "Only the ones still breathing," he said. And that almost sounded like humor. The silence between them softened. The night wind shifted again, carrying the scent of rain far off. "What's your name?" she asked. "Malachi Brooks," he said simply. "I run cattle out past Reed Creek." June nodded once, still wary. "You one of Dugan's men?" The question cut the air. His face hardened, the humor gone. No, ma'am, he said. Not his kind of work. The fire popped. Shadows moved across the stone behind him like ghosts. I can take you as far as my place, he said after a moment. Rest a day or two, then you can decide which way you're headed. I don't take charity. Then call it a trade, he said. I'll need a hand fixing a fence line washed out last storm. You look like you've got 2 good arms left. June stared at him, weighing the tone of his voice. Quiet, even, no pity in it. Just fact. The kind of voice a man used when words were heavier than bullets. She nodded once. All right. He stood, dusted off his gloves. There's room behind the saddle if you can keep your balance. June packed the knife and her small bundle, the letters MB catching a gleam from the fire. She saw his eyes flick toward it, just for a heartbeat. Something unreadable passed through his face, a shadow that wasn't from the fire. You know this mark? She asked before she could stop herself. He paused. Seen it before, maybe. Out here, names and letters don't mean much. People come and go. But his tone wasn't honest. She felt it. Some current running under the calm. She climbed onto the horse behind him, one hand gripping the back of the saddle. The animal shifted, powerful and patient. Malachi gave a quiet click, and they started west. The desert opened before them, pale and endless under the cold moon. For the first time in days, June felt the ground moving beneath her, instead of inside her. The motion lulled her, half safe, half afraid. She studied the man's back, the way his shoulders moved with the rhythm of the horse, and wondered what kind of life built someone so still. After a while he spoke, low enough that it might have been to himself. This country don't forgive much, but it teaches, if you listen. June didn't answer. The words sank into her like warm water over bruises. She wanted to ask what it had taught him, but her eyelids grew heavy, and exhaustion did what pride could not. She drifted between waking and sleep, the sound of hoofbeats blending with her breath. When she opened her eyes again, the horizon was a line of gray dawn, and the scent of smoke hung faint in the air. Ahead, a cluster of cottonwoods stood against the sky, and beyond them, the outline of a small ranch house. Malachi slowed the horse. Brooks Homestead, he said. Eda'll have coffee on. Don't mind her questions. June's pulse quickened. Etta? My sister. They rode the last stretch in silence. The house grew clearer, a porch sagging with age, smoke curling from a stone chimney. A woman stood at the gate, shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes sharp as frost. She looked June over from hat to boots, then at Malachi, then back again. Without a word, she lifted a hand and pointed toward the porch. Set her down there, she said. I'll bring water. Malachi glanced at June, a flicker of something close to concern in his eyes. You can rest easy now, he said quietly. No one dies at my gate. The horse stopped. The air smelled of sage and old wood smoke, and for the first time since she left home, June felt the ache of safety fragile, borrowed, but real. And yet, as she stepped off the horse, she saw, through the open door of the barn, a glint of steel hanging from a beam. A knife, just like hers, with MB carved deep into its handle. The morning came with the smell of wood smoke and sage. June woke on a cot near the hearth, a thin blanket drawn to her chin. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the quiet so clean it almost hurt. The last thing she remembered was Malachi's voice, steady and low, saying, "No one dies at my gate." Etta May moved across the room like she'd been born to silence. She set a tin cup of broth on the table and said, "Drink it before it cools." Her tone carried neither warmth nor suspicion, just plain truth. June nodded, her hands trembling a little as she lifted the cup. "You walked the desert alone?" Etta asked, without looking up. "Yes, ma'am." Etta stopped her work, eyes sharp and knowing. "A woman doesn't do that unless she's running from something, or toward it." June didn't answer. There were words she couldn't yet shape, the kind that stuck in the throat and cut both ways. Outside, she heard Malachi's boots scrape against the porch, the sound of a hammer striking metal. She rose and stepped out to the light. The day had come pale and dusty, the horizon already shimmering with heat. Malachi was by the corral, repairing a saddle strap, his movements slow and exact. When he looked up, the morning sun struck the sweat on his temple, and June noticed the thin line of a scar near his jaw. Old, white, healed the hard way. "You shouldn't be on your feet yet," he said. "I've been worse." "That so?" June's gaze shifted to the barn beyond him. Through the open doors, she caught sight of it again, the knife hanging from the beam, gleaming faintly. The handle bore the same carved letters. MB. Her pulse jumped. "Where'd you get that knife?" she asked. Malachi's hands stilled. "Which one?" "The one in your barn." He looked past her toward the open doorway, then back. "Belonged to my mother. She passed some years back." June's voice dropped, almost a whisper, volume soft. "Your mother's initials." He nodded once. "Miriam Brooks." June turned the name over in her head, tasting it like a word she might have known long ago. The sound settled somewhere deep, strange, and familiar all at once. "I've got one like it," she said finally. She pulled the knife from her belt, held it out. The letters caught the sun, glinting dull gold. MB. For a long moment, Malachi didn't move. Then he took a slow breath, eyes narrowing slightly, as if the world had played some private trick on him. "Where'd you come by it?" "My father gave it to me," she said. "Never told me why." Malachi studied the blade. His thumb brushed the groove where the metal had chipped, the same shape as the one hanging in his barn. "Looks like they were carved by the same hand," he murmured. Etta stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "Mal, you best come eat before the beans turn to paste." She glanced at June, then at the knife in her hand, her expression unreadable. You too, girl. You'll need strength if you're staying on here a while. I won't be here long, June said quickly. Etta shrugged. Nobody plans to be, but the desert don't care much for plans. They ate at the small table by the window. The beans were simple, salted just enough. Malachi spoke little, eyes drifting to the knife at June's hip every so often. When the plates were cleared, he rose, putting on his hat. Fence by the north pastures down, he said. Could use an extra pair of hands. June followed him out. The air shimmered with heat and the smell of dry grass. Together they hauled posts, drove them into the cracked earth. Sweat darkened her shirt. Dust caked her boots. But she didn't complain. There was a rhythm to it. Work that filled silence with meaning. At one point, the hammer slipped from her grip. Malachi bent to pick it up, his hand brushing hers for a heartbeat. The touch startled her, not from fear, but from the simple fact that it felt human. Solid, grounding. Time 900 pounds. Careful, he said quietly. Desert don't heal what it breaks. By sundown, the fence stood straight again. They sat on the porch steps, the sky bleeding orange into purple. Etta hummed somewhere inside, the tune threading through the evening like smoke. June watched the horizon darken. Thank you for the food, the work. Malachi didn't look at her. Don't thank me. Folks survive by sharing what little they have. She nodded, tracing the edge of her knife with her thumb. Your mother, she said softly. You said her name was Miriam? He gave a slow nod. She taught me to read the land, said it remembers what people forget. June's chest tightened. Her mother used to say something like that too. For a moment she almost spoke the memory aloud, but stopped. Some truths weren't ready for air yet. The wind picked up, carrying the dry smell of sage and the faint rattle of the corral gate. Malachi rose, stretched his back. Storm's brewing east of here, he said. We'll need to ride out to dry wash tomorrow. Water runs deep there. June looked toward the barn, where the twin knife hung in shadow. The two blades seemed to watch each other across the dark. She met Malachi's eyes, a question unspoken between them. The air grew still, heavy with something that wasn't quite trust, and not yet fear. Night swallowed the last of the light, and as she turned to go inside, a chill wind slipped through the doorway, dry, metallic, like the breath of something long waiting to be found. The wind rose early over Reed Creek, carrying with it the smell of rain that hadn't yet come. June woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in blue shadow. From the porch, she saw Malachi already saddling the horses, his movements unhurried but sure, the kind of grace that came from years of listening to the land instead of talking at it. Etta handed June a strip of cloth soaked in sage and warm water. For your hands, she said. Desert doesn't take kindly to soft skin. June smiled faintly, her palms already red and raw from the fence work. Guess I'll learn fast then. Etta's eyes softened just a little. The learning's never the hard part, honey. It's the remembering. They rode out toward dry wash as the first light broke. The world was still half dream, half fire. Dust glowed like gold around the horses' hooves. June rode a borrowed mare named Lark, who stepped careful, as if sensing the weight of her new rider. Malachi led the way, silent except when the land demanded words. He pointed to a line of ants cutting through the sand. "You see that? Follow them west and you'll find water. Even the smallest things know where to go when it's time." June followed his gaze, quiet. "You talk about this place like it's alive." "It is," he said simply. "Always was. We just forget how to listen." By midday, they reached the basin, a dry riverbed carved by storms long gone. Malachi showed her how to read the cracks in the soil, how to smell for damp under the rock. "Water hides," he said, "but it leaves signs for those who care enough to see." They dug until the dirt darkened and cold seeped up from below. When the first wet shimmer broke through, June laughed out loud, the sound startling even her. Malachi looked over, and for the first time he smiled, small, quiet, but real. "There," he said. "Now you can say you made the desert give back a little." She wiped her brow, meeting his gaze. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said. "But it's simple. That's the difference." They filled their canteens, let the horses drink. Then they sat in the thin shade of a yucca tree, eating jerky and hard bread. June's face glowed with sweat and dust, and she realized she hadn't felt this alive in years. There was something steady in the silence that passed between them, a rhythm built from work instead of words. When they packed up to ride home, the sky had turned that pale yellow that meant a storm would roll in by night. Malachi's eyes kept darting to the horizon. "We'll head back through the pass. Quicker that way." As they mounted up, June caught sight of a dark figure far off, a speck against the ridge. For a moment, it seemed to watch them. Then it vanished behind a line of rock. "Someone out there?" she asked. Malachi's shoulders tensed. Could be nothing. Could be Dugan's boys. June's breath hitched. "They're still looking for me." "Probably," he said. "And they'll keep looking until they find a story that makes them feel right about what they do." They rode hard the rest of the way, dust curling up around their horses like ghosts. By the time the sun began to dip, the first drops of rain had started to fall, fat and warm. Back at the homestead, Etta had a pot of stew ready, steam curling through the air. She looked them over with the eye of someone used to counting losses before blessings. "You found water?" "Enough," Malachi said. "Then you'll eat," she said, ladling out bowls. "Tomorrow you rest." But rest didn't come easy for June. That night, she stood at the doorway, the rain whispering on the roof, staring at the knife hanging in the barn. The two blades, the one she carried and the one that belonged to Malachi's mother, felt like pieces of the same heartbeat. She turned the words in her head, the ones she hadn't dared say aloud. What if this isn't chance? What if it's something passed down, something meant to find me? The thought both comforted and frightened her. Later, when she stepped back into the house, Malachi was by the fire, polishing the worn wood of his rifle. His shirt was open at the collar. the faint edge of a scar tracing his ribs. She hesitated at the threshold, something like warmth rising behind her ribs. "Malachi," she said softly. He looked up. "Those men," she continued, "if they come here, what will you do?" His gaze held hers, steady and dark. "What I always do," he said. "Keep what's mine safe." The words lingered long after she lay down, her heart uneasy. Somewhere between thunder and silence, she realized that safety could be its own kind of danger, especially when it came from someone she was beginning to trust. Outside, the rain thickened, tapping the roof like a second heartbeat. In the dark, June reached for her knife and traced the initials with her thumb, as if the steel could answer the questions her blood couldn't. Through the window, a flash of lightning lit the barn, just long enough for her to see someone's shadow move where no one should be. The storm broke before dawn. Thunder rolled low over the mesa, rumbling through the boards of the house like a restless beast. June woke to the sound of hooves, distant, fast, then gone. When she stepped onto the porch, rain stung her face and the yard was half swallowed in fog. Malachi was already at the barn, his shirt plastered to his back, checking the horses. "We've got to move," he said, his voice cutting through the wind. "Tracks in the wash. Dugan's men, 3 at least." Etta appeared at the door, wrapping her shawl tight. "You sure?" Malachi nodded. "They were watching last night." June felt the world tighten around her. The memory of lightning catching a shadow in the barn came rushing back. Real, not dream. "They want me," she said, barely more than a whisper. "Maybe," Malachi answered, "but they'll have to ride through both of us to get it done." He loaded a saddlebag with cartridges, tossed her a poncho. "We'll draw them off toward Dry Wash. They won't risk a fight near the homestead." Etta's voice cracked through the rain. "You bring her back, Mal. You hear me?" Malachi only touched the brim of his hat. "I always do." They rode into the storm. Wind clawed at their coats, sand biting their eyes. The world shrank to the drum of hooves and the smell of wet dust. June kept close behind him, the mare's breath steaming in the cold. When the sky lightened enough to see, they were deep in the dry riverbed. The walls rose high, slick with rain. Malachi raised his hand. "Stop." The sound of echoing hooves came from ahead. He turned in the saddle, voice low. "They're here." June's pulse hammered. She saw shapes moving through the mist, 3 riders fanning out, rifles glinting in the half-light. "Down," Malachi whispered. He dismounted, pulling his rifle free. Volume medium. "There's a hollow under those roots. Crawl in and stay put till I call." "I can fight," she said, throat tight. He gave her a look that was half anger, half fear. "Not this time." She obeyed, sliding into the hollow beneath a tangle of yucca roots, the earth damp and cold against her cheek. Through the gaps, she saw him move, slow, deliberate, a shadow with purpose. The first shot cracked through the rain, sharp as lightning. Malachi answered with one of his own. Horses screamed, mud splattered. The smell of gunpowder and wet clay filled the air. June bit her lip to keep from crying out. Every echo felt like it hit inside her chest. Then, silence, sudden and heavy. She waited, counting her own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. A figure stumbled into view. Malachi, clutching his side. Blood seeped dark through his coat. She scrambled out before she could think, reaching him as he half collapsed against a rock. "Don't," he gasped. "Stay down." "They're gone," she said, eyes wide, searching the ridges. "Malachi, you're hurt." He gave a short, dry laugh that turned into a groan. "Just a graze. I've had worse." She tore a strip from her sleeve, pressing it to the wound. The blood was warm, too bright against the gray of morning. Her fingers shook. "Hold still," she whispered. "You'll make it worse." "I told you to hide. And I told you I can fight." He looked at her then, really looked. Rain streaking both their faces, her hands stained red with his blood. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that had nothing to do with words or debts. When the bleeding slowed, he leaned back against the rock, breathing shallow. "They'll circle around by noon. We'll have to move before then." June nodded, trying to steady her voice. "We can make it back. Etta will patch you up." He gave a faint smile. "She'll scold me first." For a moment the tension eased. Then June noticed the tear in his coat, a long cut across his side, jagged, almost familiar. She stared. The wound traced the same angle, the same depth as the scar she'd seen once before, the mark a blade like hers would leave. "Malachi," she said quietly. "That scar, how'd you get it?" He hesitated. The rain pattered between them. "Long time ago," he said finally, "before I had a home to come back to." She reached into her belt, pulling out her knife. The dull steel glimmered wet. "From a blade like this?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but the silence spoke loud enough. June felt the air go thin. "You knew, didn't you? About this knife?" He looked away, toward the storm breaking open across the horizon. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He met her eyes. The rain softened to mist around them, the sound of thunder fading far away. "MB," he said at last, voice low, heavy. "It's not my name." The words landed between them like a spark in dry grass. Before June could speak, another sound cut through the quiet, the distant rumble of approaching hooves. Malachi pushed himself upright, blood still seeping through the cloth. "They're coming back." June tightened her grip on the knife. "Then we end it now." He shook his head. "No, we run." She looked at him, defiant. "Running's what got me here. Times 700 mams. Maybe," he said, pulling himself into the saddle, grimacing. "But sometimes living's the only fight left worth winning." He reached down, offered her a hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. The rain had stopped, leaving the air raw and bright. They rode toward the western ridge, the sound of pursuit rising behind them, the desert swallowing their tracks. And as they disappeared into the fog, the echo of his words followed her like a ghost. "It's not my name." By dusk, the rain had thinned to silver threads drifting off the ridge. June and Malachi stopped near a cluster of cottonwoods, both soaked, shivering, too tired to speak. The horses stood still, their sides steaming. Malachi slid from the saddle, breath ragged, one hand pressed against his wound. "Sit," June said, more command than request. He obeyed without argument, dropping onto a flat stone. She knelt beside him, cutting open the blood-stiffened fabric of his shirt. The wound was deeper than he'd let on, dark at the edges. "This isn't just a graze," she murmured. He gave a breath that might have been a laugh. "You patch better than most doctors I've met. Just keep me from bleeding out, and I'll be grateful." June worked in silence, wrapping the bandage tight. When her hands brushed his skin, she felt the tremor under it, not just from pain, but from something older, something unspoken. When she finished, he caught her wrist gently. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she answered. "You still owe me a truth." Malachi's gaze met hers, the firelight from their small camp flickering across his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his coat pocket and drew out a weathered scrap of cloth, faded blue, frayed at the edges, embroidered with the same initials as the knives. M.B. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "Miriam Brooks. She carried it the day I was born and the day she died." His voice wavered but did not break. "She worked as a midwife on the cattle trails, helped women no one else would touch. Runaways, widows, folks running from the law. Said everyone deserved a start, no matter what name they carried." June sat still, listening to the fire pop. "One summer," he went on, "a wagon train came through. Storm caught them out on the flats. My mother found a woman half dead from childbirth. The baby lived, the woman barely. Before she passed, she pressed that knife into my mother's hand and said, 'If my daughter ever finds you, tell her I meant to keep her safe.' My mother carved her initials on it beside her own. 2 women tied by the same blade." June's throat tightened. "The woman, her name?" Malachi looked into the fire. "Martha Hale." June froze. The name hit like a wave of heat and cold at once. "My mother," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Then this was meant for you." The world tilted. For a long time she couldn't speak, couldn't think. She had spent years believing her mother's kindness had been weakness, believing her father's bitterness was all that kept them alive. Now she saw the truth unfold, how mercy had passed from one woman's hands to another's, stitched across years and bloodlines. "She knew," June said softly. "My mother knew we'd meet." Malachi's eyes were tired but kind. Maybe she didn't know who, just that someday someone would find what she left behind. June turned the knife over in her hands, tracing the faded carvings. All this time I thought it was my father's mark. I thought it meant what he took from me. It means what she gave, Malachi said. A way to live when there was nothing else. For the first time in years, June felt her anger loosen, like a knot finally slipping free. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was full of breath, of understanding. The night deepened around them. Crickets sang. The fire burned low. "You should rest," she said. "Tomorrow we'll ride east, back toward Cedar Hollow." Malachi frowned. "That's a dangerous road." "I know," she said, "but it's time I stopped running from it." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You've got your mother's look when you say things like that." She smiled faintly. "And you've got her knife." He laughed once, soft and low, then winced at the pull of his wound. When he finally slept, June sat awake by the dying fire. She watched the smoke climb, curling toward the stars like a prayer too old to name. She thought of Miriam Brooks and Martha Hale, two women whose courage had crossed the desert and landed here, in the hands of their children. And when she turned toward the saddlebag, something caught her eye. A thin crack of wax sealing a folded letter, tucked deep under the flap. She drew it out slowly, heart beginning to pound. The seal was marked with a small, pressed flower, brittle but intact. It smelled faintly of sage and rain. Her hands trembled. The handwriting across the front was careful. The ink faded but still legible. "For June, if the world ever turns kind again." She looked over at Malachi, sleeping, the firelight soft on his face. "Mother," she whispered, "you knew all along, didn't you?" The wax broke with a small sound, like a sigh. Dawn came late, slow and colorless. The world washed clean, but heavy with silence. The rain had ended, yet mist clung to the low hills like breath that hadn't yet decided to leave. June and Malachi broke camp at first light. His wound had stiffened, but he hid the pain behind a steady rhythm, checking saddle straps, coiling rope, setting the trail with the surety of a man who refused to fall twice in the same dust. They rode east toward Cedar Hollow. The air was sharp, smelling of wet stone and pine. For miles neither spoke. June kept her mother's letter tucked safe inside her coat, close to her skin, afraid the words might vanish if she opened them too soon. By mid-morning, the clouds began to gather again, darker this time. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of lightning before the first crack split the sky. Malachi looked up. "We need shelter. There's a ravine just ahead, Black Arroyo. We can wait it out there." The horses quickened their pace, hooves splashing through shallow runoffs forming in the dirt. When they reached the mouth of the arroyo, the wind howled so loud it swallowed every word. "Stay close," Malachi shouted. The next moment, a wall of water roared down from the cliffs, fast as a breaking world. The flash flood hit before she could draw breath. Malachi's horse reared, and June's mare lost footing. "June!" She barely heard him through the roar. The current tore at her legs, pulling her down, cold and relentless. Then, pressure. a rope around her wrist, biting tight. Malachi had thrown his reins, the leather looped around her arm. "Hold on!" he yelled. The force jerked them both sideways, dragging through the mud. She clawed at the slick rock, coughing, the rope cutting into her skin. He pulled with everything he had, boots digging for purchase. The world was nothing but water and noise. Then, somehow, they were on the far bank, breathing, gasping, alive. The flood raged below, carrying branches and stones in its teeth. Malachi's chest heaved, blood seeping fresh through his bandage. He reached over and untied the reins from her wrist, his hands shaking. The skin beneath was raw, marked red by the leather. "You all right?" he asked. June nodded, though her voice had left her. He sat back, rain dripping from his hat brim, watching the torrent below. "It doesn't take much," he said quietly. "One storm, one mistake. The land reminds you who's boss." June wrapped her arms around herself, the cold sinking deep. "And yet you still live here." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Where else would I belong?" She looked at him, the question echoing inside her. Where do I belong? They found a small overhang, a pocket of dry beneath a stone ledge, and built a small fire from what wood they could salvage. The smoke curled sluggishly, heavy with damp. June unwrapped her wrist, rubbing the sore skin. "You saved me," she said softly. Malachi shrugged, voice rough. "Just paid back what's been given. You could have let go." "I don't let go easy." Silence settled between them again, the kind that wasn't empty, but full of things unsaid. June reached inside her coat and drew out the letter. The wax seal had cracked during the storm, the edges soft with moisture. She stared at it for a long time, thumb tracing the faint curve of her name. Malachi watched her quietly. "You gonna open it?" "I'm scared to," she admitted. "If it says something I don't want to know, what then?" "Then you'll know anyway," he said. "And that's something most folks never get." June smiled, weary and small. "You sound like someone who's read too many ghosts." He chuckled once. "You'd be surprised how much ghosts have to say." The wind eased. The sound of the flood faded into a low murmur. June sat cross-legged by the fire, the letter trembling in her hands. "Think," she said slowly. "I've been running from this for too long." "Then stop running," Malachi said. She looked at him, his eyes steady, the firelight warm against his dark skin. There was something in that gaze that made her feel both exposed and safe, the way the horizon feels after a storm, emptied of everything but truth. June took a breath and broke the seal. The paper inside was thin, the ink blurred at the edges, but the handwriting was unmistakable, her mother's, careful and looping. "My June," it began. Her vision blurred before she finished the first line. She blinked, forcing herself to go on, her voice a whisper against the hiss of the rain. "If the world ever turns kind again, I hope it finds you. I hope you know your father's love was not gone." It was buried beneath fear. He did what he must to keep you safe. June stopped, the words twisting in her chest like something alive. Malachi leaned forward slightly. What does it say? She couldn't answer. Not yet. She closed the letter, pressing it to her heart. Tomorrow, she said, when the sky clears. He nodded once. The fire cracked, its glow painting their faces gold. Outside, the storm began to fade, the rain thinning to a soft patter. June lay down beside the fire, her eyes heavy. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was the flicker of light against Malachi's face, and the reins he had tied, now coiled neatly between them. The end of it still looped around her wrist, like a quiet promise. When morning broke, the world was glass, clean, cold, and still dripping. The flood had carved new lines into the arroyo walls, pale scars glinting in the sun. June stirred the embers of their fire, watching them blink back to life. Malachi was quiet, tying up their packs, his every motion measured, like a man nursing more than one kind of wound. She pulled the letter from her coat. The paper had dried stiff, edges curled, the ink faded but unbroken. You should hear this, she said softly. Malachi looked over, nodded once. June smoothed the page across her knees and began. My June, by the time these words find you, the world will have already asked more of you than it should. You'll think your father betrayed you. Maybe in a way he did. But I need you to understand why. She swallowed, eyes flicking up to the horizon. The sky was bright, but a low ache hung behind the light. Your father's debts were not in coin, but in lives. When Dugan came, he offered him a bargain, to sell one soul to spare three. He chose you, because he believed you strong enough to survive. And he was right. June's voice broke. She looked at Malachi, but his face was unreadable. He made them believe he gave you away for his own sake, but it was to free others. 2 children bound for the same chains that took me. He bought their freedom with yours. He sent you toward the only person who could keep you safe, Miriam Brooks. If you ever see the mark MB, trust it. It means home. June stopped reading. The wind shifted through the ravine, lifting her hair from her face. The words hung there, fragile as ash. He did it to save others, she whispered. All this time, he wasn't a coward. He was trying to keep me alive. Malachi nodded slowly. Sometimes doing right looks like sin to everyone watching. She folded the letter, pressing it to her chest. The ache inside her eased into something quieter, heavier, but no longer sharp. The hatred she'd carried for years began to lose its teeth. Dugan used him, she said, voice low. Used us both. Malachi's eyes darkened. He's used a lot of people, but now we've got proof. You think anyone in Cedar Hollow will listen? He glanced at her. They'll listen if you make them. She studied his face, the small scar near his jaw, the steadiness that never seemed to break. You talk like a man who's already tried. He smiled, thin and tired. Maybe I have. They broke camp before noon, the desert still wet under the hooves. June rode beside him, the letter folded safe in her saddlebag. Every mile closer to Cedar Hollow felt like walking toward the mouth of a story she didn't finish writing. When the ridge opened up to the plain, they saw the town far in the distance, small, sun-bleached, waiting. The sight made June's stomach twist. What if they don't believe me? Truth doesn't need their permission, Malachi said. They stopped at a stream to water the horses. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp clay and sage. June bent down, letting the cold water run through her fingers. It's strange, she murmured. The same hands that threw me out are the ones I want to forgive. Malachi dismounted, crouched beside her. That's the thing about forgiveness. It's not for them. For who then? For you, so you can keep walking. She looked at him then, really looked. The sunlight caught in his eyes, and she saw the weariness there, but also a kind of faith she'd forgotten people could carry. He straightened, wiping his hands. We'll reach Cedar Hollow by nightfall. We'll need a plan. What kind of plan? First, find proof of Dugan's dealings. Letters, ledgers, anything. Etta knows people in town. She can help. June nodded, gripping the reins tighter. And if he tries to stop us? Malachi's mouth curved, slow and steady. Then he'll find out what kind of woman this desert made. They rode on. The light sharpened toward afternoon, painting the land gold and harsh. Ahead, the roofs of Cedar Hollow glimmered like old tin, and the trail narrowed into memory. For the first time in years, June didn't feel like she was running away. She was riding toward something. Truth, maybe, or peace. But when they stopped on the ridge to rest, the sound of laughter carried up from below. Too loud, too familiar. Malachi's hand went to his holster before she even spoke. June leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. That voice, Dugan, Malachi said. Down in the hollow, 3 riders waited, their horses restless, rifles slung loose. At their center sat Marshal Dugan himself, hat tilted, smile sharp as a knife. Well, he called up, his voice echoing through the canyon. Ain't this a sight? The girl who lived and the man who should have known better. June's pulse stuttered. The letter burned against her chest like a second heart. Beside her, Malachi's voice dropped low. Stay behind me. But June's eyes never left Dugan. For the first time, she didn't flinch. Not this time, she said. I'm done hiding. Cedar Hollow looked smaller than June remembered, but meaner too. Like a prayer said too many times without belief. Dust rolled through Main Street in thin curls, catching on the boards of the saloon porch. The church bell was cracked now, its tone dull and off-key. As they rode in, silence followed them. A few faces peeked out from behind curtains, eyes quick and fearful. No one waved. No one smiled. Malachi dismounted first, his boots landing heavy on the dry boards. Stay close. June slid down from her mare, tucking the letter into her coat pocket. She could feel Dugan's eyes somewhere in the watching crowd, though he wasn't yet in sight. They went first to the post office. Etta May was waiting. Gray shawl, sharp eyes, same quiet steel. She looked from June to Malachi, then closed the door behind them. Took you long enough, she said. Storms got in the way. Malachi answered. Etta glanced at his side. And bullets, by the look of it. He gave a faint grin. Just scratches. June laid the folded letter on the counter. We've got proof, Etta. My father didn't sell me. Dugan forced him. Used debts that weren't even real. Etta nodded, slow and grim. I know. Folks have whispered it for years, but whispers don't count unless someone puts ink to paper. She reached under the counter and pulled out a folded sheet. A copy of an old debt ledger, stamped with a seal too fresh to be true. Found this last week, she said. Marshall's handwriting, but the date's wrong. Real clever forgery, unless you've got the original. June's hands trembled. Then we can prove it? With the letter from your mother, yes. Together, it's enough. Etta's gaze softened. You sure you're ready for what comes after? Dugan won't go quiet. June looked out the window, where the street baked under the midday sun. He's had enough quiet. It's time people hear. Etta sighed, then nodded. All right. Widow Calder's saloon is packed this time of day. Folks love a good story when it don't cost them anything. We'll give them one that might. Malachi checked his revolver, spinning the cylinder once. You sure about this, June? She met his eyes. It's not just about me anymore. They stepped back into the street. The sound of piano drifted faint from the saloon, mingling with laughter too bright to be clean. The smell of whiskey and dust hit as they entered. Inside, the room fell quiet at once. Dugan sat near the back table, hat tilted low, a half-empty bottle in front of him. His badge caught the light, gleaming, almost mocking. Well, he said, leaning back, the prodigal daughter returns, and she brought help. June walked toward him, each step slow, deliberate. Malachi stayed one pace behind. I came for the truth, she said. You forged my father's debts. You sold people like cattle. I've got proof. The crowd murmured. Dugan's smile didn't move. Proof, sweetheart. The only proof that matters around here is who's still standing when the dust settles. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded sheet. You mean this? He waved a paper marked Warrant for Theft of Property, June Hale. Signed and sealed. June's breath caught. You made that up. He shrugged. Town don't care what's made up if it makes sense. Malachi's hand hovered near his holster, but she caught his arm. Not yet, she whispered. Etta stepped forward from the doorway, volume medium. They'll care when they hear the rest. All eyes turned as she held up the ledger copy and the letter from Martha Hale, her voice cutting clear through the smoke. Every name in here, every false debt, every person Dugan took. This woman's family paid the price so he could live fat on fear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Widow Calder froze behind the bar. June unfolded her mother's letter and began to read aloud, her voice steady though her hands shook. Each line filled the room like church bells, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. He traded my life for others, not for gold. If you ever find this, remember that mercy runs deeper than blood. When she finished, the room was silent. Marshal Dugan rose from his chair, his smile gone now. "That's a fine story," he said softly. "But it don't change who holds the gun." He lifted his revolver. June didn't flinch. "No," she said, "but it changes who the town's looking at." Outside, boots scraped on the porch. Several deputies appeared at the door, rifles raised. But they weren't aimed at her. "Marshal," one of them said, voice tight, "we heard enough." For a moment, Dugan looked around as if he might laugh, might charm his way free again. But this time no one laughed with him. He took a step back, and his boot slipped in a puddle of spilled whiskey. The room held its breath. June's hand went to her knife, not to use it, but to feel the weight of the initials there. M.B. Etta's voice, calm and certain, broke the quiet. "It's over, Marshal." The air thickened with waiting. The saloon was silent, save for the creak of the ceiling fan and the breath of the storm gathering outside. The smell of rain and whiskey tangled in the air, sharp enough to taste. Dugan's gun hand hung half-raised, his eyes darting between the deputies who no longer waited for orders. "Marshal," one of them said again, voice steady this time, "put it down." Dugan smiled without warmth. "Boys, you forget who taught you to hold a gun?" Another deputy shifted his weight, rifle aimed square. "We remember, sir. We just stopped admiring the lesson." For a moment the whole room trembled on that thin edge between courage and blood. June stepped forward, the letter in one hand, her mother's knife in the other. The initials glinted faintly in the lantern light. "You built this town on fear," she said, her voice low but clear. "But it's not fear that keeps people standing. It's mercy. And you've never had the heart for that." Dugan laughed once, bitter and hoarse. "Mercy doesn't win gunfights." Malachi moved closer to her side, hand resting loosely on his revolver. "Maybe not," he said, "but it ends them." Widow Calder's breath caught as Dugan turned the barrel toward Malachi. "You think these folks will follow you, rancher? They'll bury you next to the rest of the forgotten. Then I'll have better company than you." The shot never came. Etta May slammed the butt of her shotgun against the table, the sound cracking through the tension. "Enough!" she barked. "You point that thing again, and I'll remind you what justice feels like from the wrong end." The door blew open with a gust of wind, and a dozen townspeople spilled in. The blacksmith, the preacher, the widow with her infant, even two of Dugan's own men who'd heard June's words through the windows. Reverend Amos stepped forward, coat flapping in the draft. "This town has sinned by silence long enough," he said. "Let the truth stand on its own." Dugan's face blanched. "Truth? Truth is what I say it is." June took another step toward him, the knife steady in her hand, though her voice trembled. "Then say it, Dugan. Say you forged the debts. Say you sold my mother and a dozen others to pay your way to power." He sneered. "You think anyone will believe the daughter of a thief?" Malachi's voice came calm, ringing like iron. "She's not a thief. She's the one thing you'll never be. A survivor who learned how to forgive." The room shifted. June saw it, the moment the crowd decided who they were. Dugan swung his pistol toward her, but Widow Calder lunged, catching his arm. The gun went off, shattering a whiskey bottle behind the bar. Smoke and screams filled the room. June moved on instinct, the lessons of the land humming through her blood. She ducked low, knocked the gun from his grasp with the hilt of her knife. It clattered across the floor, spinning to a stop beneath a table. He reached for another weapon, but Malachi was faster, stepping in, shoulder-driving Dugan backward through the doors and into the muddy street. The two men hit the ground hard. Rain began to fall again, hissing against the dust. June followed them out, breathless, knife still in hand. She stopped at the porch, the lantern light spilling around her boots. Dugan was on his knees, soaked and beaten, his badge lying in the mud beside him. "Go on," he spat, blood mixing with rain. "Do it. You want justice? Here I am." June stood over him, the blade hovering between them. For a heartbeat, everything in her burned to end it, to carve out every ghost that had ever hunted her. Then she thought of her mother's letter. Mercy runs deeper than blood. She lowered the knife. "No," she said, softly. "Justice doesn't need another grave." Etta stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Marshal Dugan," she said, "by the authority of this town and the eyes of everyone here, you're done." The metallic click of the irons echoed against the rain. Dugan didn't fight. He just stared up at June, disbelief hollowing his face. "You think forgiveness makes you strong?" She met his gaze. "No, it just makes me free." Behind her, the townspeople began to stir. Murmurs first, then a slow, rising chorus of voices. The preacher's voice cut above them, quiet but certain. "Let it be written that fear no longer owns Cedar Hollow." The rain came heavier, washing the mud from the street, washing the past from their boots. Rain turned the dust of Cedar Hollow into dark clay, soft beneath boot heels. People gathered in the street, shoulders touching, the sound of their breathing louder than the storm. Dugan stood between two deputies, wrists bound, hat gone, the gold of his badge dulled to brass. June stood across from him, her coat heavy with rain, her hair plastered to her face. Every muscle in her body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of release. Etta May stepped forward, voice sharp and steady. "You've heard it all," she said to the crowd. "The ledgers, the lies, the lives bought and broken." Someone shouted from the back, old Mr. Talbot, the blacksmith. "And what now, Etta? Who keeps the peace when the law's the one who broke it?" Etta's jaw set. "Then we start over. We choose better." Reverend Amos lifted his hands. "Let the truth settle where it belongs. The Lord's wind has swept this place clean." Dugan laughed, low and bitter. "You fools! You think the world changes 'cause of one girl with a letter? June stepped closer until they stood an arm's length apart. The rain ran between them like a river. It doesn't change because of one girl, she said. It changes because folks finally stop pretending they don't see. The marshal's eyes flickered. Something between anger and something smaller, almost regret. You sound like your father. I hope I do. He flinched, just slightly, and for the first time, she pitied him. A man who'd mistaken power for belonging, and now had neither. Etta signaled, and the deputies led him toward the jailhouse. No one jeered. No one clapped. The crowd just parted, silent and solemn, like a congregation letting go of a ghost. When the door slammed shut behind him, June felt the first breath of freedom fill her chest. It wasn't loud, wasn't sweet. It was just there, steady as the land after rain. Time 200 pems. Malachi stepped beside her, hat dripping, eyes on the horizon. It's over, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, it's begun. At that moment, a figure appeared at the edge of the square. A man leaning heavy on a cane, hair gone white, coat soaked through. His face was lined deep with guilt and years. June, he said. The name caught in her throat. Father. Silas Hale's voice was rough from disuse. I tried to tell you. Long ago, they wouldn't let me. She looked at him for a long time. The years between them stretched and folded in the rain until all that was left was a trembling truth. She had hated him to stay alive. I know, she said softly. He took a breath that sounded like breaking. I'm sorry. June stepped closer. The words that rose in her weren't easy, but they were real. So am I. But I'm done carrying what should have buried with them. He nodded, eyes glistening. You've got her courage, you know. Your mother. The ache in her chest turned warm. No, she said. I've got hers. And yours, too. For the first time he smiled, faint and broken, but true. The crowd began to drift away, slow as a tide. Some tipped their hats. Some simply looked at her and nodded, quiet gratitude in their eyes. Malachi watched them go, then turned to her. You gonna stay? June looked around. The wet streets, the shuttered windows, the sky clearing in soft bands of gold. I don't know yet, she said. Maybe the land will tell me. He chuckled. It usually does. She reached into her coat, pulling out the knife. The steel gleamed clean in the rain. Here, she said, holding it out. Your mother's. He shook his head. It's yours now. June hesitated, then smiled. A quiet, knowing thing. Then maybe we both keep a piece. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a short leather cord, cut in half, and handed her one end. It was smooth, worn, braided tight. He tied her half to the knife's sheath. Now it belongs to both. The last of the storm broke open into sunlight. They stood there for a moment. The town behind them. The open plain before. Where to? he asked. She looked toward the west, where the light poured across the wet earth, and said, "Where the ground's still soft enough to grow something." Evening fell over Reed Creek like a sigh. The last of the sun caught on the wet fields, turning every puddle into gold. The air smelled of sage and rain. The world washed clean again. June Hale crossed the yard barefoot, her dress brushing the grass still heavy with dew. The horses stirred in the stable, quiet and content. She had been walking since dawn, unable to sit still. The silence of peace felt strange, soft, almost fragile, like something she might break by breathing too loud. Etta May sat on the porch, mending a sleeve under the fading light. "You got the look of a woman who's finally dropped a stone she carried too long." June smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." "Don't mean it's gone," Etta replied. "Just means you ain't dragging it no more." They sat together, the porch creaking beneath them. From the barn came the sound of a horse shifting in its stall, the whisper of wings as a dove flew up into the rafters. "Town'll talk," Etta said. "Some'll say you're foolish. Some'll say you're brave. Either way, they'll keep talking." "Let them," June murmured. "Maybe they'll learn what truth sounds like." Etta chuckled. "That's what your mama used to say." The door behind them opened. Malachi stepped into the light, his shirt half-buttoned, a clean bandage showing beneath the fabric. His voice was soft, rough from the dust and the day. "Doc says I'll live." Etta lifted a brow. "Shame. I was thinking of keeping your horse." Malachi grinned, settling beside June on the step. His hand brushed hers. A quiet connection, steady and certain. They watched the hills darken, the first stars winking through the cloud's edge. "Strange," June said, "standing still after all that running." "That's what survival is," Malachi said. "You never notice the quiet until it's yours again." Etta stood, gathering her sewing. "Stew's on the stove. Don't let it go cold." Then she slipped inside, leaving them with the sound of crickets and wind. "You ever think of leaving this place?" June asked. Malachi's eyes traced the horizon. "Once or twice. But fixin' things here feels better than startin' over somewhere else." "Fixin'?" He nodded. "Land breaks. So do people. But if you're patient, both can heal." June looked at him for a long moment. "You think I can learn that?" "I think you already did." They walked to the barn without speaking. The scent of hay, oil, and rain met them like an old song. June climbed the short ladder to the crossbeam. In her hand was the knife, the one that had followed her through hunger and forgiveness. The letters MB caught the light. She hung it beside another, Miriam Brooks's knife, the one Malachi's mother had left behind. The two blades gleamed together, edges dulled by time, handles touching like joined hands. "There," she whispered. "Now they're both home." Malachi's voice rose softly from below. "Looks right." When she came down, he handed her a small pouch. Inside was half of a braided leather rein, smoothed by years of use. "The other half of what tied us together in the flood," he said. June looped it around her wrist. You still have yours? He nodded. Always. Then I guess we're even. Even's a good start. They stood close, lantern light shifting across their faces. For a heartbeat, the whole barn seemed to breathe with them, volume soft. You ever get tired of savin' people? She asked. He caught her hand, thumb tracing the scar left by the rains. Only when they forget to save themselves. I won't forget. I know. Outside, wind swept through the open door, carrying the scent of sage and wet earth. The night hummed, soft and endless. Malachi turned down the lantern. Come on. Edda'll think we fell asleep in the barn. But June lingered. Her gaze lifted to the knives above, their mother's blades, shining faintly in the dark. They weren't just weapons anymore. They were keepsakes of mercy, of lives bound by choice instead of blood. When she stepped out, the moon had climbed high, silvering the fields. The rain had returned, thin as silk, whispering over the roof and into the grass. Malachi took her hand as they crossed the yard. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The porch light burned steady in the window, spilling a warm circle of gold. June paused at the steps, looking back once. The barn door swayed in the wind, and the twin knives flashed in the moonlight. Brief, bright, eternal. They're home, she murmured. So are we. Inside, Etta had left bowls on the table, steam curling above them. The fire crackled low, and the air smelled of thyme and smoke. June hung her shawl on the peg, the weight of her journey falling with it. Malachi poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat by the fire, the only sound the rain tapping on the window and the quiet rhythm of breath finding its way back to peace. June leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closing. The warmth of him, the steady rise and fall, felt like something earned, not given. My mother used to say, Malachi murmured, every wound's a doorway, if you let it heal right. June smiled, half asleep. Then I guess we found the threshold. The fire snapped once, bright and small, and settled again. Outside, the rain went on falling, gentle, forgiving, washing the desert clean, one heartbeat at a time. Under the quiet rain of Reed Creek, June and Malachi found what so many hearts spend a lifetime searching for: peace, forgiveness, and a place to belong. Their story isn't just about survival in the Wild West. It's about finding light after long years of shadow and learning that home is not a place but a person who stays when the storm ends. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever carried an old hurt and learned to let it go, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your memories, or simply what this tale reminded you of in the comments below. Your voice keeps stories like these alive, weaving the past into the present, one story at a time. If you enjoyed Betrayed by Her Father, Left to Die in the Desert, Black Rancher Found Her, please give it a like. Share it with a friend who loves old Western tales, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you new stories every week, gentle, timeless journeys of love, redemption, and the spirit of the American frontier. So pull up a chair, Pour yourself a cup of coffee and stay a while. There's always another story waiting by the fire.